Today's top story from the perspective of someone who's there.
You are looking live.
This just in.
Not my beat.
To Orlando we go, where we find our friend JP Finlay covering the NFL's league meetings, as they would like us to call it, the owners' meetings, as the rest of us actually do. JP, how's Orlando?
What's up, Huff? They weirdly have rebranded it again. They want this one, the big one. They want this one called the NFL Annual Meeting.
Oh, but there's other owners' meetings that are
knows.
also annual. What is this one, or why is this one like the annual meeting?
Because this is where they make rule changes.
But don't they sometimes push those like to the one that's 2 months later?
Yeah, dude, I'm just telling you what the signage says. They're going with annual meeting.
So the breaking news from Orlando, JP Finlay can still read. He can read the signage. Notice I did say can still read, JP. I did you that favor. I could have gone for the very cheap joke of can read. I did not. I expect that repaid at a later date. Okay, so there's kind of two paths we could go down here. There's the league path and there's the Commander's path. Let's start with the Commander's path. And I think the biggest hubbub is happening online certainly right now is this 4-minute segment that the insiders did on NFL Network, in which there's a clip of an interview that Pelissero does with Dan Quinn, where Quinn does not rule out a trade back. In that clip, Garofolo says everyone seems to think the Commanders are circling in on Jaden Daniels. And then Pelissero, to end the clip, and this was the big banger, says, well, I've actually heard that a lot of people think that Adam Peters think he's going to take J.J. McCarthy. How much of this is just people talking out of their behinds right now and trying to confuse everybody? How much of it you think is real information? What's the actual hubbub that's going through your ears right now down there in Orlando when it comes to the Commanders and quarterback?
Well, I mean, among those dudes, guys I know and you know that I respect, nobody's talking about their behinds, right? They are hearing things.
Of course.
I just actually tweeted out what I found to be a really interesting comment from Peters as this Pelissero thing I got 50 people sending it to me on Twitter. Adam Peters made a specific comment that's during his media availability earlier. That's why we're going to go through our entire process so that there's no recency bias. There's no, this guy's my favorite. And they have 2 more pro days this week. The last pro day they were at was Michigan. So if somebody talked to Peters or talked to somebody close with Peters or whatever, and you're going to ask him, how are the pro days going? I think it's entirely possible, if not probable, he would be like, man, JJ looked great because he was just there. He just watched it. And I posted a video earlier with Jim Harbaugh. If you listen to Jim Harbaugh talk about that pro day, it apparently was the greatest one of all time. And I don't know how accurate that is, but I was standing there as Harbaugh was talking about it. And he seemed so sincere when he was discussing it that I tend to believe him. And he said he had GMs from all over the league reaching out to him to tell him how great JJ looked. And I think the vibe here, and honestly the vibe in Indy, was much more serious about JJ than I think fans realize. I don't know that I think if you want to draft JJ, you probably have to get ahead of the Giants at 6. Now, who knows what will happen come draft night. But specific to Washington, that's the last guy they saw. So if somebody's going to be like, what'd you think of him? He was great. And I don't think they've made up their mind. I still deep down kind of think they're leaning Jaden. And I think they're going to go to LSU this week. Then they're going to go to Carolina. And I just don't think anything is certain. I think they will certainly continue to listen to trade offers. All of that remains on the table. These guys, we learned it during the coaching search, right? That they weren't going to do anything until they went through their entire process. And that kind of perhaps landed them with a second or third option, whatever it was. But I know that when Raheem Morris got the Atlanta offer, he called them and was like, hey, I got the Atlanta offer. And they're like, well, good luck. We remain committed to all of these interviews. And we understand if we lose you, we lose you. These dudes are going to stick to their plan. And I think spending some time with Adam Peters today, you can see that he is a calm, measured person. And I don't think they know what they're doing. So the suggestion that it's definitively one thing or another, I think is just premature.
I think that's such a good point. And, everyone's got, they can like all three guys. That's possible. But
Right.
there's no way they know yet because they will need to complete the process. And they still have pro days. They still have private workouts. They still have 30 visits. They still have all this stuff that is going to go into that. Another thing that I think is worth pointing out, combining 2 points you made earlier in that answer, is if you want to get above the Giants at 6, the team at 5 is the LA Chargers, who are coached by Harbaugh. So there is a little bit of self-serving potentially happening from Harbaugh. Of course, J.J. McCarthy's former college coach, but also might be sincere. I guess the question I would have, JP, before we leave this part, and I want to know what else you heard from Peters in a second, but I guess the last piece of quarterback-ness here is, if you want McCarthy, do you just take him at 2 because at this point you think enough of the rest of the league is serious about him that trading back and then trying to trade back up for him or trading back a couple of spots might be a couple of spots too many, and he could go as high as 3 in this draft if you trade out of 2?
I think if you identify McCarthy as your guy, just take him at 2, right? Because it sure seems like he could go 5, and if you can go 5, you can go 3. All it takes is one team. And if you identify this guy as the future of your franchise, then getting an extra second is just not worth it. I keep going back to the Trey Lance trade for the Niners, and not in the end result, but kind of even that process. If you go back to that draft, everybody knew it was going to be Trevor Lawrence and then Zach Wilson. And when the Niners traded up, it was presumed it was going to be Lance. But then there was that period of time for a month before the draft where everybody said it was Mac Jones, if you remember that.
Yep.
It was oh, my God, they traded up to take Mac Jones. And then it ended up being Lance all along. But when you talk to Peters and Quinn, I'm sure he'll answer some questions more. These guys, you pick Dan Quinn because he's a leader. J.J. McCarthy just won a natty, has all those leadership qualities too. If you're going the leadership route, you could take McCarthy at 2. And I know that some fans will flip out because they're not getting appropriate draft value. If you find a franchise quarterback, there's no sense in trading to try to move down 2 spots to get a little bit more.
No, I totally agree. And I'm someone who's very keen on trading back, but that's with the caveat that you think all these dudes are kind of equal. But
right.
Also, I think that the chances, especially because they're so different stylistically, that you think they're equal are actually pretty slim. JP Finlay, host of B-Mitch and Finlay. Of course, you can also watch him on NBC4 down in Orlando for the NFL's annual meeting, as they would like it to be called. There we go. He's adapting. He's learning, boys and girls. All right. You were in the scrum with Peters. He talked today. What did Adam Peters, what was the most interesting thing that came out of that conversation?
I mean, I'd say he talked for 15 minutes. 10 of it was about quarterback. And he is very good at evading the questions, right? So it was more kind of process-driven and how they're getting there. And he repeatedly kind of said it's the hardest thing to do in sports, to draft and develop a guy. It was interesting. Whether he means it or not, I'm not sure, but he did say that they're comfortable if the guy they draft isn't ready, that they'll go with Mariota. He also said they're going to have 4 quarterbacks when they go to camp, and they got to get 2 of them somehow. So that I found kind of interesting, that it might not just be a QB at number 2, but maybe later in the draft, or maybe they sign somebody else. I asked him about trading Sam Howell, and he said it was difficult. He has a lot of respect for Sam, but he thinks it's good for everybody. He thinks, they moved up a little bit in draft position. Sam landed in a good spot with a team that wants him, and it gives Seattle, at the very least, a viable backup to Geno, if not maybe something else. The John Allen stuff, I'm sure you've talked about, or maybe you haven't.
We haven't gotten to it on the show yet, but it's certainly made its way around the internet that they're not interested in trading him.
Yeah, he was unequivocal that we're not interested in trading John Allen. He's talked to him, and that kind of was spawned from John's probably end of season interview with the Junkies, when he said, not sure I want to go through another rebuild. And Adam kind of joked, well, we're recalibrating, we're not rebuilding, which I thought was kind of funny. But I had heard that I had heard that thing had kind of moved forward and everybody was all good. And now you get it on the record. The other kind of newsy thing was asked about Jamin Davis's fifth-year option. And he said, we haven't talked about the fifth year yet because they had until May on that. But he did say, listen, you got to play three linebackers. And I think Jamin can learn a lot from Bobby, and we're excited about that. So to me, it sounds like, we're not picking up that option, but we hope he goes out and plays a lot better this year.
Right. There's almost no reason to pick it up because those fifth-year options are pretty darn expensive relative to linebacker contracts where you can get him at a pretty similar number on a multi-year deal and get team control. So that's just math. Sorry, Jamin. That's the math that do mathin'.
And he hasn't played to that level,
of course,
to get it.
Of course,
I think because I think say he had played there, I think you pick up the option and then start negotiations immediately about a long-term deal. I don't think with Jamin at this point you do either of those.
Right. No, fair enough. JP Finlay, of course, host of B. Mitch and Finlay, with us here on the Hoffman Show. Okay, so that's kind of the Commanders' bucket for now. There was actually, I will ask you about this real quick. They also signed a player today. Michael Dietrich, I believe, is his name, the center, who started a bunch of games last year in Houston, in front of C.J. Stroud. They obviously signed Biotish. He actually played next to Biotish at Wisconsin at guard. Is this a guy that they're looking at as a starter at left guard potentially? Is he an interior depth piece? This seems like a pretty nice signing at this point in free agency for a guy who started a bunch of games last year.
Well, dude, a funny story about that. So the team tweeted that out. And think about, everybody's kind of talking about how Peters is so tight-lipped. And I can tell you as somebody that likes to report news, you're not getting a lot out of Ashburn these days. It's Michael Dieter is the name.
Dieter, yes. Sorry, thank you.
It's okay. When that got announced while we were in the room with Peters and standing from the Athletic, he's like, hey, apparently you guys signed this guy. And he showed it to Peters, and he's like, oh, really? And we were all kind of taken aback, he didn't know. And then he just started laughing. Clearly he knew, and then it already happened. That was just when the social media team got to announce it. But it was
that's a funny bit.
Damn funny. Yeah, it was pretty funny. It was pretty good. I don't know, dude. I think they're gonna just really try to upgrade the collection of linemen and eventually kind of let them battle it out because you got Alec Reddy. The one thing Peters did say, though, was I believe it was Sam Fortier kind of pressed him on left tackle, and Peters said he'd be comfortable with Cornelius Lucas or Trent Scott battling that out, which, one, makes it sound like Wiley's starting at right tackle, and two, I don't really believe him about Big Luke and Trent Scott being the possible options at left tackle, but he said the word optionality a ton. I think he just wants one to have. I think they were so active in free agency so that they didn't have to address needs in the draft, and two, I think next year it's a lot of short-term deals, and they'll still have a ton of cap space next year, and they can continue to turn this thing over until they get it right.
No, that is for sure. They've kept it's very similar to what they did in San Francisco when they got there in 2017, which is probably a good model because Peters was obviously heavily involved. But it's good signing for a guy who's a starter for a bunch of games to get that depth piece. And then you get the competition, and a good time will be had by all in training camp. Okay, so the big news coming out of that annual meeting down there today is the banning of the hip drop tackle. I saw you, as well as some others, posted the video of the examples. As you watch that video and you're in the room and you hear the folks from the league explaining kind of what's happening here, what do you make of it, and did their explanation ease any of the concerns for you that a lot of people have in terms of how this is actually going to be officiated?
No, I don't think their explanations did, but it sure seems like I've gotten every indication that they're going to try like crazy to not make this a call on the field and rather make it a fine and a letter during the week for players. So that should ideally alleviate some of the confusion in game and some of the fan anger and stuff that will emerge if they call one of these pretty subjective penalties late tight game. Dude, I even thought on the video they showed of examples, some of them are clear and egregious, and I get that it's a penalty, or it will be a penalty now. But even some of the videos in the example video, I don't think were that clear. I think they continuously make it harder for defenders to make plays. The NFL spokesperson was asked about scoring being down, and not that this was a direct result of scoring being down, but they said, yeah, we're aware scoring's down. We want it up. They said the sweet spot for scoring is at about 45, and it's trickled down the last few years after going crazy during COVID, which is just kind of bizarre, but it did. I think it's an unnecessary kind of kicked hornet's nest that the league is kind of bringing on themselves with this hip drop thing. But they'll tell you the numbers. They pointed out that they clocked 230 swivel hip drops last year that should have been flagged. And if you back out the math, that ends up being about one per game. And then 15 guys got hurt directly because of that type of tackle. So that is almost one guy per game getting hurt. And the other part of it is they said the numbers of these tackles have increased over the last 3 years. So for whatever reason, this specific tackling technique is gaining popularity, and they just want to stop that before the trend continues. But defenders are mad about it. I don't know. I retweeted it. Did you see Cam Curl's tweet? It's not something we can say on. I missed Cam's
show. Tweet. If you can figure out a creative way to say it, you can share. If not, people can just go to your Twitter feed.
Yeah, it was a word that rhymes with fit, and imagine a word that rhymes with fit. He said fit soft.
This is soft. He said this is soft.
Basically, this is soft. Yeah.
Yeah. I think it's tough. I mean, I think that we're going to talk about this later in the week, and we might have a this show's designated defensive player on, if people that have been listening to the show for a while know who that is, and if not, tune in later this week. That's a tease, they call it in the business.
Right there.
But to me, I get banning this because of the injury risk, but you also should get, I want to know what defensive players want in return. Can we return chucking guys over the middle? That's it. It would suck if you're a wide receiver and you're across the middle and you get thrown off your route, but you're probably not going to get hurt in the way that you might on a hip drop tackle. So to me, it's if you're going to take away something in the name of player safety, how do you try to keep the balance of the game the same of something that you maybe legislated out purely for competitive reasons? To me, there's got to be a balance, and that seems to be where defensive players are upset as much as anything. It's all you do is make our job harder. You never actually give us anything.
Yeah, I think most defensive players would feel that way. And then, you take it a step further, and there's less and less money at linebacker. Linebacker almost is kind of in that similar running back situation. And then, you saw some DBs, some safeties. That veteran safety market wasn't a great place to be. And so, if you make it harder and harder for the defensive players, and then maybe their stats don't look as good, frankly, maybe their film doesn't look as good because they're more limited, maybe it has a direct, impact to the marketplace. And one thing I found interesting with the hip drop stuff is the union opposed it. The union didn't want it. And generally, the union is going to be on the side of player safety. So maybe it's because they want to protect their guys from getting fined, and it sounds like the league plans on, making this a fine-driven infraction rather than a flag-driven infraction. I don't know, but I do know the union isn't into it, and that's interesting for a player safety thing.
No doubt about it. JP Finley's got it all covered, Commanders and league news from Orlando at the NFL's annual meetings, a.k.a. the owners' meetings. JP, great stuff as always. Look forward to hearing you and B. Mitch chat it up tomorrow, and we'll also be watching for the reporting on NBC4. Thank you.
All right, buddy. Thanks.
This is The Hoffman Show on the Team 980 and the Odyssey app.